So this is a one day across the province of full withdrawal of services, and I suspect that there'll be more. Although we are cognizant that we want to be in our schools, we want to be teaching kids, but we don't want to jeopardize future generations by accepting cuts.
Thousands of students in Ontario are out of class today due to a one-day strike. Public high school teachers and some support workers walked off the job when their union and the government failed to reach a contract deal by midnight. Most public high schools closed as a result, but some elementary schools were also affected. The sticking points include wages, average class sizes, and mandatory online courses. So are the two sides anywhere near a deal? Stephen Leche is Ontario's Minister of Education. He joins us from Queen's Park. Hi, Minister Leche. Nice to see you. Thanks for making time for us today.
Of course. Thank you, Vashi.
Minister, if your government didn't want this walkout or strike to happen today, why didn't you submit a formal proposal to the union?
We have actually provided a variety of iterations of proposal to the union over the course of the negotiation that commenced over 200 days ago. To be quite frank, the one constant through the process, irrespective of the proposals, the changing and expanding proposals we've offered, the union has said no. We announced a change to our online learning program from 4 courses mandated to 2. They dismissed it. We announced changes on classroom sizes from 28 to 25. They dismissed it. I mean, each and every time, we've even added $200 million in net expenditure in public education, and that was insufficient. The fact is we're spending more than any government in Ontario's history. We have proposed many options which they've rejected, and yesterday I asked them in good faith, bring forth an innovative option that allows us to achieve those offsets but keeps kids in class, and that's the ultimate objective of the government, which we hope to achieve today.
But actually yesterday what you described in the afternoon was that you were willing to bend on class sizes in exchange for the unions agreeing to a 1% increase in annual increase in salary. And you said that had been proposed to them when in fact later at night you admitted that no, that had never been formally proposed. Are you bargaining in good faith here?
What I indicated yesterday, with greater precision in my verbiage, is just simply to indicate that you can't have it both ways to OSSTF, to the teachers union we're dealing with. You can't reject our proposals but bring no innovative proposals forward yourself. But
are they really rejecting your proposals? Sorry to interrupt. Like, what proposal, has there been a specific proposal where you're saying, I'm willing to bend more on class sizes in exchange for compensation? Yeah. And did you actually submit that, or are you just doing it through the media?
In August, I actually communicated quite in a very loud way, publicly and at the table, we want innovative options in the absence of accepting the ones we have tabled and we have moved. What is, for over 200 days since we started the process and for months since the OSSTF tabled their first and only proposal, they have not moved at all. And I think the one constant, to be fair, is we've made proposals. We've now called on them to make innovative proposals, and yet they haven't. We've been bargaining for 4 consecutive days, no movement by the union, and that actually transcends these past 4 days. For months since their proposal was tabled, they made no moves. What is constant in their proposal, however, what is increasingly the red line for the union, is a request for a $1.5 billion increase in taxpayer dollars. Keeping in mind, Vashi, while I have deep respect for educators, we need them, we want to retain talent. OSSTF teachers, secondary teachers in Ontario, they make $92,000 on average. We are the second highest remunerated educator in the country. So we value their work, we're maintaining high wages. But our priority is to say 1%, $750 million, is a reasonable offer to our teachers union, but they're being unreasonable by saying no. We're not going to accept that. We want a $1.5 billion, or else we're going to strike like they did today. And I think parents justifiably are frustrated that every 3 years we go through the same story, irrespective of the Premier, irrespective of the government.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the wages in a second, but first, just so that I'm clear, is the latest proposal from your government from August, or are you prepared to make, because I know what you signaled at the time on class sizes was moving from a cap of 28 to 25. Are you prepared to move even further than that, further down than that, or is that the offer that you've put forward as of August?
We have tabled a variety of iterations. They're public, as you will know. We've also announced since August, but reaffirmed it yesterday, that I want them to bring forth a new plan, an innovative option that achieves the fiscal objectives, but it still actually protects the kids in the front of class. I've reaffirmed that option. I'm just trying to signal to parents we've been reasonable systematically and consistently through the process. What is unreasonable is for the teachers union to say no to our expanded proposals and announcements, and then not to propose a new initiative themselves. That's unfair. And I think parents are saying, look, How is that a reasonable proposition, especially given that there is a mechanism to get a deal through a voluntary settlement, which is through mediation, private mediation, which they have rejected to date. And I'm hoping in good faith they will consider that. I think that is the best way forward to get a deal to keep kids in this province in class.
So teachers, on the issue of wages, teachers or the unions are arguing that 1% and 1% increase won't cover the increase in cost of living. Earlier this year, your government approved a 20% increase in rental housing cost allowance for MPPs. If politicians get more money to cover an increased cost of living, shouldn't teachers?
Well, actually, an all-party committee, the Board of Internal Economy, made that decision. The government did not.
So are you opposed to it?
Quite honest with you, I think entitlements for politicians are more than sufficient. I'm fighting for the taxpayer at the table and for students' interests. When it comes to what we've offered the union is a $750 million increase. And I think if we make this more about our students and not about ourselves, we'll be able to get a deal. The union has said to us, look, $150 million is insufficient. We want $1.5 billion. Here's a case study of where that became true. We proposed the exact same offer to OSSTF education workers as we did with CUPE a month ago, where we got a voluntary settlement with CUPE education workers. And OSSTF said to us, without any equivocation, it's insufficient because it's 1%. Now CUPE accepted 1%. Apparently that's insufficient for OSSTF, and they said no. And we're back in this position of deadline bargaining and children out of class, which I believe is totally irresponsible.
But the question I asked is essentially, and I take your point that it's the Board of Internal Economy, but that affects politicians in your party. Your party has done nothing to reverse the increase in rental allowance that politicians now enjoy because of an increased cost of living. Teachers are arguing they need more than 1% because it's expensive to live in Ontario.
Right.
Why is it not okay? Why is it okay for politicians to say that and not teachers?
Yeah, look, to be quite frank with you, many members, myself included, are eligible for that entitlement, and I don't take it. I've not posted any expenses myself. So if we talk about leading by example, but the point is, in the context of teacher salaries, in Ontario, they make $92,000 on average. That's a pretty high income. It's the second highest in the nation. And to be quite frank, my offer to them is to be fair, to say if we're going to put ancillary dollars in the system, it should be to help our kids. And my preference is more monies in mental health, in STEM education, and improving math scores, which plummeted over the past decade under the former Liberal government. I think that is the pathway to get a deal. It's to put students at the center of the discussion, not expanding entitlements or benefits for ourselves. And to be quite frank with you, I think the pathway to get a deal is to do two things. One, to accept that $750 million of tax dollars is reasonable, given the jurisdictional comparison that the second highest in the nation, and two, to turn to independent private mediation, as we did with CUPE, to get a deal. And I think parents deserve predictability. I think parents deserve to know that there was an option that the teachers' union leaders did not consider, and that regrettably has led us to this place where they've escalated themselves. And to be fair, they escalate against every government of every premier in the history, the last 20 odd years of education. And I think that's really frustrating for folks at home.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I really appreciate your time, though, Minister Leche. I know it's a busy time, so thanks so much.
Thank you.
Ontario Education Minister Stephen Leche from Queen's Park.
After the government has made so many moves, the onus now is on the union to make a move and to be reasonable. For 200 odd days, we've started bargaining. For months, they've tabled their first proposal, and they haven't made one single substantive change, not one.
Ontario public high school teachers staged a one-day strike today in a bid to break a deadlock in contract talks with the provincial government. Moments ago, we heard the government's perspective from Ontario Education Minister Stephen Leche. Now, let's hear from the union. Harvey Bischoff is the president of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. He joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Bischoff. Nice to see you. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
How optimistic are you that this one-day strike action today will result in any kind of movement at the bargaining table?
It's difficult to be very optimistic right now. The government still has positions on the table that would significantly erode the quality of education in Ontario. We haven't seen a great deal of movement from them at this point, so we have to hope for the best, but it's hard to be terribly optimistic.
Help me understand, I guess, the position of the union. We just interviewed the minister, and what he said was that they have put forth some concessions or some form of an offer. He said basically that they are willing to concede, for example, on class sizes in exchange for that 1% cap on salary increases, but there has been no sort of counter offer from the union. What is your position?
So let's be clear that what the minister is defining as concessions are not, in fact, concessions. Last year, average class sizes were 22 to 1. This year, by the unilateral action of the government, they're 22.5 to 1, which has resulted in some classes being 40 or more students, some students not being able to get access to the courses they need even to graduate. And the minister still wants to raise it from 22.5 up to 25 to 1. This year, there are 0 mandatory e-learning courses. The minister wants there to be 2 mandatory e-learning courses. There's no evidence to say that those are good for students. And in fact, the minister points to Alabama, a state that ranks 49th out of 50 when it comes to U.S. education quality, as a model for his program. So to define those as concessions, it flies in the face of reason.
Minister Leche said, and I want to quote him exactly, that the OSSTF has not proposed innovative options or proposals and have not moved at all at the bargaining table. Your response to that?
Well, it simply doesn't reflect the facts. So for well over a year, we have proposed several ways in which the government could find money to reinvest into frontline services. We've proposed a scaling back of a frankly wasteful standardized testing regime that they've implemented. We've proposed an alternative dispute resolution mechanism to reduce the costs of grievance arbitration litigation. We proposed and piloted last year a sick leave support program, so my members who have long-term illnesses can get back to work with support sooner, which helps save school boards money. And each of those suggestions and proposals has been rejected by the ministry out of hand.
The minister also charges that your union and the people and the teachers in that union are very focused on the salary issue. Is that a fair point?
You know, this is entirely disappointing from this minister to try to deflect and frankly inflame the current situation, which isn't going to help us get to an agreement. We have significant differences about quality of education issues like class size, like the appropriate number of support staff who work with high needs and at-risk students in our schools, like mandatory e-learning. We also have a difference of opinion about compensation. I believe that my members are entitled to keep up with the pace of inflation. So we're proposing that they get a compensation increase pegged to the inflation rate. They've fallen behind inflation for the last 7 years straight. We're not proposing a catch-up, just a keep-up from here on in. And the minister wants to turn that into some sort of enormous dispute when there are many, many other things on the table.
He says CUPE agreed to the 1% salary increase, and he raises the question, why won't your union?
Yeah, so he likes to point to one outlier agreement as if that creates a trend. In fact, the real trend is created by about a dozen arbitrated agreements in Ontario in 2019, where an independent third party landed on 2% on average as an appropriate increase, and where negotiated agreements have run closer to 2%, where overall salary increases across the public and private sector combined are running at about 2.7%. So the minister can insist that 1% is reasonable because one union agreed to it, but it's not at all the trend. And on top of that, it's not an offer from the government. It's a legislated wage cap, which we believe interferes in our right to freedom of negotiation.
And you're referring there to the legislation that they passed in the middle, almost essentially, of negotiations, right?
Indeed, they introduced it once we had gotten to the bargaining table. They passed it this fall, Bill 124, and we see it as a very likely violation of my members' free bargaining rights.
You know that the minister is framing this in the way, in a bigger context, beyond just what's happening with the union and with teachers. The reason they say that they passed that kind of legislation is against the framing of a big deficit, a multi-billion-dollar deficit that this province faces, and a lot of money that goes towards servicing that debt. Are you, I guess, sympathetic at all to that framing and to the idea that there is a big deficit that the government is up against? They also they use comparative numbers to show that teachers in Ontario make more than the average teacher across the country. I'm not sure your feeling on that, but that's the argument that they're putting forth. And I'm just wondering if you're sympathetic to that at all.
So for the last 7 years, my members' compensation increases have fallen behind the rate of inflation. So they have made those sacrifices, absolutely. But this is a government that seems to find money for things like they're willing to risk $1 billion on putting beer in corner stores. They just spent $230 million canceling green energy projects, a project from which they will get nothing. They've spent money, lost money to fines over lost hydro contracts with the U.S. So whenever they want to find money for something, they're happy to find it. But when it comes to paying my members, which includes support staff members that I represent, who earn on average $38,000 a year, when it comes to them keeping up with inflation, suddenly that's where they draw the line.
Okay, Mr. Bischoff, I'll leave it there. I really appreciate your time this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's Harvey Bischoff, president of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.